Hello and welcome to British Music History. I am Luke Edwards and today I'm going to be diving into the heated debate that has been raging among the Beatles faithful in recent years. Are the new remixed versions of their classic songs better than the original mixes? Now, before we get started, I want to quickly give a mention to my Patreon page. Your support will really mean the world to me, and it will really help to keep British music history going strong. So if you'd like to sign up and get some exclusive perks, as well as watch videos like this ad-free, then check out the Patreon link in the video description and play your part in growing a community of like-minded music obsessives like myself. Now, for the rest of you, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you like what I'm doing here, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload, and click that notification bell to stay looped in on all my latest videos. And needless to say, feel free to post a comment below to share your thoughts on this topic, as I will be sharing my own view on this hotly debated question. Are the new Beatles mixes better? The eternal debate when it comes to the new Beatles remixes. Things started to get much noisier about this back in 2017 when Giles Martin released the 50th anniversary remix of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, but he also did some remixes earlier in 2015 for the Beatles 1+ compilation and the Love album for the Cirque du Soleil project. Since then we've had remixes of the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be, Revolver, and most recently the Red and Blue albums, with more releases seemingly on the way. As a fan, these remixes have proven to be a fascinating topic on numerous discussion forums. Are these remixes just shameless cash-ins, forcing fans to buy the same albums all over again? Or are they now the definitive versions that newer generations of Beatles fans should be listening to? Questions such as this tend to stir up a lot of strong emotions on either side of the fence, so if you're a newcomer to the Beatles, it can be hard to know where to stand. So I'm going to be offering my own opinion on the matter, but feel free to comment below to let me know what you think too. Now, in their early days, the Beatles were all about that mono sound, even for albums like the groundbreaking Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. As a result, the original stereo mixes from that era were pretty rough around the edges. You'd have John's vocals hard panned left while Ringo's drums blasted from the right. It was like listening to two entirely different recordings altogether. Even The Who's Pete Townshend was quite vocal about this back in 1966. This afternoon, John Entwistle and I were listening to a stereo LP of the Beatles, in which the voices come out of one side and the backing track comes out of the other. When you actually hear the backing tracks of the Beatles without their voices, they're flippin' lousy. Funnily enough, I don't think the Beatles would entirely have disagreed with the gist of what Pete Townshend was saying. Most notably, George Harrison spoke about the mono versus stereo debate in his interview for the Beatles anthology documentaries in the mid-1990s. When they invented stereo, I remember thinking, why? What do you want two speakers for? Because it ruined the sound from our point of view. You know, we had everything coming out of one speaker. Now it had to come out of two speakers. It sounded like very naked. And lest we forget, back in 1974, after the Red and Blue albums were first released, John Lennon spoke about the exact same problem on a New York radio station. Some fool had tried to make it stereo and it didn't work. Because, you know, there's a difference between stereo and mono, obviously. And if you mix something in mono and then try and fake it, you lose the guts of it, you know. But never mind. It's all in the past, isn't it? So the lads themselves even said that many of those original stereo versions sounded naked and fake compared to the mono mixes. And I'm totally with them on that. But at the same time, listening to the Beatles in mono in 2024 just doesn't feel right, does it? So if there's a way of improving the stereo mixes, surely it's worth a try, right? Now, for this reason, for classics like Revolver and Pepper that were originally conceived in mono, Giles Martin's new remixes finally give us the best of both worlds. All of that mono power, but spread beautifully across the stereo field. And as a fan, these have now become my go-to versions because it's like hearing them for the first time in 1966, 67, but in proper stereo glory. I suppose you could say that I personally think that yes, the remixes of those particular albums may actually be better. Now for their later stuff, like the White Album, Abbey Road and Let It Be, that's where it gets a bit tricky. By then the Beatles were embracing the stereo format as the future. So while those original 60s stereo mixes may sound a bit dated now and are by no means perfect, they do represent how fans at the time first experienced those songs as intended by the band. So when it comes to historical accuracy, remixing those albums does risk rewriting history and may take us too far away from how audiences were initially exposed to that music. That's why for those later records, I personally feel the original approved stereo mixes are better than the remixes, at least for me. Sure, the new versions have a more contemporary sounding clarity and much greater fidelity, but they also tinker a bit too much with the band's original stereo intentions in my book. I have been on the fence about the White Album though, I must admit. This was a transitional album for the Beatles really, where they were just starting to wrap their heads around stereo. So the remix does have some moments that do improve and even embellish upon the originals, but I wasn't happy with what Giles Martin did with Helter Skelter. Those grimy staccato bass notes that I was used to hearing were suddenly all cleaned up and had lost all of their grit. So on the whole, I tend to prefer sticking with the original stereo version of the White Album, and by and large, I prefer it. It's a completely different story for the early mono years though. For the truly vintage albums like the lads' debut album, Please Please Me, I'm well up for the new remixes that recreate that mono magic in stereo, just like Giles Martin did with Pepper and Revolver. I mean, I was pretty flabbergasted by how fantastic the Beatles' early songs on the Red Album remix sounded, for example. In fact, it was a revelation. Can you imagine listening to Rubber Soul from start to finish once it gets the same treatment? Hearing it just like fans did in 1965, but now with a more full-bodied, stereophonic attention to detail? Count me in. I mean, at the end of the day, I do like to experience the Beatles albums as close as possible to how audiences first heard them back then. And from the monophonic early years, these new remixes seem to be finally nailing that vintage mono vibe properly, recentering the vocals whilst giving us all of the richness of stereo that the previous remasters lacked. But once the boys caught on to that stereo sound on their later albums, well, those original stereo mixes are the way to go for me, quirks and all. It's all about keeping it authentic, really. So it's looking like this. If it's a stereo remix of something made prior to 1968, when mono was the Beatles' primary concern, the remix is probably better. But post 1968, well, I think the original stereo mixes are more preferable to me because it's just more historically accurate that way. But what do you think? Do you think the new Beatles remixes are better, or should we just stick to the originals? Let me know your hot takes down in the comments. Give this video a like if you appreciated my thoughts on this, and subscribe to the channel for more discussions about British music history moving forward. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.